Hey, everybody. As promised, we are taking a look at a Sam Kieth image. Unlike a lot of the recreations that we've done, we are not going to recreate this.
In its entirety. No.
No, because, like we were talking about off camera, Carson, I think this is when someone uses the word graphomania, this is a fine example of the type of thing that you're talking about.
Yeah, like just obsessive mark making. But it's really beautiful. And I think this is why the patrons who voted on looking at the Max and Sam Kieth, I think they were interested in his ink techniques and seeing us break them down because there's such a variety of them. And I
Right.
mean, we're not even getting into the later stuff where he's painting, right? And bringing that
Right.
into it. The amount of techniques on display in any given Sam Kieth image, it's so potentially varied. So the best we can do, I think, is just pick areas,
Right.
because
Because
otherwise
this
we'd
is
be here all day.
what would you say? I mean, I was guessing this is probably a 15 to 20 hour illustration.
Yeah, I have no idea. A lot. I always knew he made a lot of ticky marks, like the
Right.
hair, but until I got this into Photoshop to like print it out, I didn't realize how much was actually going on until you see it large. Uh, it- there's so many different tools being piled up. So like you're having to do one layer with one tool and one layer with another tool, doing like brush hatching and then going back over with the pen. And then he's going in and stippling in areas on top of all of that or underneath all of that.
Right.
Yeah, I have
um,
no idea.
and the white doesn't necessarily look like it's subtractive. It looks like he's working around some of the white in the black areas.
Oh, there's
It-
definitely subtractive white.
yeah. Well,
I
in
can
the
see it in the scan, like in the arm for sure. There's hatching with the white. You're talking about like the torn stuff here.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that looks inked with a brush to me. But there is some subtractive white in there. I have the scan up too because printed out in blue with all of the texture. It's just at the size we're at. The other thing is, I don't know if it's a part of the scan or if it's how the image was made, but in the piece I have here, it looks like this might be two pieces of paper taped together. So we
Mhm.
might be drawing it at like half size.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think that that's probably a scanner aberration. I think that probably it's combining two scans. Like maybe this was reproduced as a gatefold, or somebody scanned it in on an oversized or a small scanner.
Do you think this was
Um,
done at the size we're working at?
uh, yeah, I don't. I'm not sure. I'm not willing to bet on it. Um, I really, I'm not sure. I do know that it didn't look anything nearer this detailed when it appeared in the. This is a Marvel Comics Presents cover, right?
Yeah, and there's no way it could have. And I think like when we were looking at the Max, it was like you see, and this is one of the reasons I grabbed a Wolverine piece. Because I don't think the Max presented all of what everyone's interested in Sam Kieth necessarily. I mean, it has a
Visually,
lot
yeah.
of it, but at least um the pages I could find original images online that were high res enough for us to work over top of didn't have this kind of stuff in it. So that's why I grabbed this one.
Yeah, so you were I was saying graphomania. Um it, I wonder if the mushrooms here, the psychedelic mushrooms in the corner of the image might have something to do with that too. Um I don't know if anyone within the range of my voice um has experience with drugs of various types, but certain types of mental states, which can be arrived at through certain types of drugs, can have a tendency to um, cause people to fall into visual arts of a certain type and can lead to a certain type of fixated mark making.
Yes.
let's say. Is that safe to say?
Yeah, I don't use many, but when I have smoked weed or eaten edibles, the few times I have, I become a very obsessive mark maker. I don't know. I've never taken shrooms, so I don't know about that experience. Is that what you're implying, that mushrooms will do that as well?
Yeah. I haven't done any drugs, by the way. I had a friend and acquaintance tell me, who was a drug user and drug seller, I think, tell me that I should never do drugs because my personality was too psychedelic.
Yeah, I can't. I'm too scared of psychedelics because of that. Because I'm prone to paranoia, and like I can't even barely smoke weed. I get too paranoid, and
Right. Yeah, he
yeah,
just
I
told
have
me
panic attacks and stuff like that. That's just bad news.
he told me in his professional opinion that I had a mental state that was similar to certain kinds of highs, and therefore I should stay away from trying to be high because I might just have, extend some of my natural tendencies or whatever.
Yeah, that's always been my kind of assumption about myself, which is funny because my brother, and I don't think he'd be mad at me for saying this. He quite enjoys mushrooms every now and then, and he quite enjoys going out into nature on the mushrooms. And we've gone hiking together, and he's explained to me what he sees that he finds so enjoyable when he's on mushrooms. And I remember one time he told me, oh, like you see the space between the leaves, like the sky
Right.
between the leaves becomes important. And I said, well, that's just negative space.
Right.
Like that's just like artists see that shit all the time. Um, and every time he's told me stuff like that, I've been like, yeah, I'm aware of those things like all the time. Like, I don't know why this is such a big revelation to you. And I told him, I said, it sounds like you're just seeing the world like an artist. And then I've seen articles where they say that when they check the brainwaves of people on psilocybin, that the closest brain patterns that they can get on someone not on drugs is an artist observing things. Are
I feel
the
like
similar
we've
patterns?
I feel like we've probably had this exact conversation before, and somebody's probably going to chime in and be like, "Yeah, you guys talked about that 6 months ago."
Probably. That's bound to happen.
Why
No
you
big
were,
deal.
yeah, why you were redrawing, X, Y, or Z. Uh,
Sergiotopy.
right, exactly. When I'm drawing this right now, because I'm putting this in pencil, I'm sort of getting a map of the lay of the land here, and can sort of feel out how he's done some of these things here. So the big chunks of black, I can see like areas where he's basically decided, okay, I'm going to gradate that on the edge of the chunk of black. And then in these muscle tone things here, he's like clearly laid out where he wants the bands of muscle to be. This is like the roid arm here.
Yeah, I mean,
For
this is,
drugs.
yeah, the musculature on here is so impressive and absurd.
Um, and he's indicated where they're going to be, and then all of the patterns that he's doing are feathering essentially uh, to built up within the individual segment
Well, I
of
think there's some
musculature.
basic, and I think in some of his art, he maybe even uses like a marker at this stage.
Hmm.
Because like what you'll see what I'm doing is just putting in the
Yep.
big,
Yeah, that's what I'm going to do right now.
I think that's the first stage.
I agree.
But when you really look at it, there a lot of that what looks like line work is built up just from ticky marks.
Right.
But I do think there is some basic like line drawing going on. I'm doing it with the brush. Some of the scans that I saw, just the change in the ink being darker or lighter, or just the way that the ink looked, kind of looked to me like marker.
Oh, okay.
But I could also see like sometimes the ink from a brush comes out lighter.
Mm-hmm. And like some of these things, like the torn white edges hanging over the black on the top, those look to me like they were penciled in and then avoided. There's some avoidance white. Is there a better way to say that? Avoidance white.
Yeah, I don't know. That works for me. But it's a
And then
very
there's
odd, like chunky shape like that, which given the way it ends up,
right, looks fairly crude in comparison. Yeah.
Yeah, you're like not like if I saw this artist starting this way, I would kind of think, okay, that's about where it's going to end up. You know, I've seen artists who basically draw like this, and then that's it.
Right.
And it's so hard to make it through the
If you
details.
didn't have the feathering on the black edges, these areas would seem like the glove and the headdress would seem much too high contrast in comparison to how textured the arms are going to get. But the fact that he goes in and feathers on top of that gives it a more uniformity with the other areas.
Yeah, so like this piece of the glove here, I'll do this and then leave the glove alone because the glove's
That's funny. We're
pretty.
basically doing the same order here so far.
Yeah. Well, it's like, okay, we're going to attack the arm for a little bit, and then we'll move on to the pots that you're talking about are avoiding the white.
Right.
I'll move over there. His forehead's really impressive because he's like, he goes back in and stipples, but I don't even know if I want to take on that area. So I'm just going to do these two. Then he does this feathering that you're talking about, which is coming along. And just doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And this is obviously to me done with the brush because this works exactly perfect. Except I'm not warping my lines the way he did. Whoops. He starts turning the line there. And then he comes with a flick outline here. So to me, it looks like I don't know, I guess he could go either way, but it looks like these lines he comes in down like this, and then the longer lines he flicks out because you get the taper off into the like dry brush look, which works better with the flick out. Whereas the more controlled lines you would start to, I always think about it as an airplane coming in for a landing and you're already like moving in the path. He could be doing some of it this way too, but you're already drawing in the direction that you're going to go, and then you land the brush. I think that's a big technique of his. A lot of people try and get it with the flick. I know you're more of a flick.
Right. I'm living in a right-hand world, Carson.
Yeah. But I think there's more control over where the lines start and stop with the landing, whereas the flick is a little bit random. But the flick gets the dry brush look better. So who knows? I think he's working both ways. I definitely work instinctively. I will switch between a drag and a flick.
You suppose this was had a certain soundtrack when it was being inked?
Oh God,
Grateful
I couldn't
Dead.
even imagine. What would you be playing?
Master of Puppets.
Okay. Why that in particular?
Oh, I don't know, because I think that some of the the like a early thrash metal might give me the right like visual move or the physical move to my brush,
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like this is so I'm weird about music when God, I can't do this. I'm weird about music in that I like stuff that is I'll put on a playlist that's constantly changing. So the music doesn't influence what I'm doing. It just keeps my brain occupied. If it's like just one artist over and over, you know, like listening to a whole album, my brain will get too bored. So it's hard for me to predict that kind of stuff because it's like, I don't know, I would have on like Elton John and then Metallica and then some techno and okay, so then on the arm here, there's a lot of brushwork, very obvious brushwork. Moving between, I believe, drags and flicks. And it's really hard to tell at what density any of that's happening or where it starts and stops because it piles up so much.
Right.
And then there's obvious like yeah, there's even weird things where he's like going up and over, up and
Yeah,
over.
there might be some rotation happening. It certainly is for me because I'm not able to match a right-hander's strokes.
So he's obviously a right-hander to you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Although I see what looks like rotation to me in the hatching.
Yeah,
I might be wrong. Weirdly enough,
I'm having to. I'm
when I was
having to a
doing
little bit.
when I was doing the pre-press for Strange Death, and I was going back over it one last time, I could actually see some of the issues that Dave was having on Dave's last pages, but only going in a certain direction. I could see a hatching issue. It was only when he was moving to the left and at certain angles, you could see a waver to the brush.
Interesting.
Before his, significant, like debilitating injury. But like
I'll
the
have to
pages
go back and look. It's like a wobble.
Yeah. Yep. But traveling up and to the left. Anyway,
Yeah,
if you're a left-hander trying to match the exact right-hander strokes with the same tools, you'll oftentimes find that everything that you do is like that. It's just.
and if you want to talk about like the fine brushwork that we were doing in that, I think Sam Kieth has some of the finest brushwork I've ever seen. Like this area here,
Yeah,
he gets it like kind of dry. He lets his ink get dry, which is one of the things that I was doing to get the fine line work. And then really just piles it in there with kind of like some dry brush technique, kind of just like line hatching.
He's definitely an opportunistic dry brush user as well.
And it almost becomes hard to tell when he's doing dry brush and when it's hatching.
This is one of the reasons that I was asking about the black and white printing of the Max. And specifically, I've just been thinking about a lot recently about reproduction and what artists are or aren't served well by, the current state of reproduction.
Yeah, they definitely have done a number of artist editions, like different companies have done. I think there's some Batman ones, there's some Max ones, there's some Wolverine ones. Like I think he's somebody that people really like to see in the original black and white for the reasons that we're finding out right now. But this kind of stuff right here can only be done with like hardly any ink on the brush.
Right.
And you're kind of letting the line break up. It's so hard to, there's so many just in this one area, so many different directions of line and really fine hatching. And then he starts like hatching this way.
We should say none of this would have been a first pass. I doubt that he's finishing a single area.
Oh yeah, totally not. It's just for me, it's easier. Like now that I'm in there, there's a big difference. And we say this every time we do these, but there's a big difference between like being able to look at what someone's already done and then like the actual order that they did it in. And it's really hard when you get in an area to like stick to what you think that when it's all there. You talk about the graphomania, when it's all there and it's fun, it's hard to go, okay, let's go back to what I think he did.
Right. I'm trying to approach it in mind so far more like that, in that I'm moving around, which I think is actually what I did. I said before, opportunistic dry brush. When you're working with the brush, opportunism is very important. Unless you have 100% brush control, um, you know, I mean, somebody like Carson is much closer than any other human beings are going to get. Um, you, it is wise to be opportunistic. If you have a charged brush, you're naturally going to get a thicker line. Alex Raymond trick, be damned. So it makes sense opportunistically to then do large areas once you've loaded your brush. When you dip, I just dipped my brush right now.
When I dip, you dip, we dip.
Now that I've dipped my brush, I'm going to do an area of larger stuff. And that's what I mean by opportunistic. As your brush conditions change, you take advantage of that to move to a different point. And one of the reasons for that is just because that's a pleasing workflow that helps you develop an image. I mean, you don't pencil all these little ticks in. He didn't go through and make a pencil tick for every single.
Hope not.
Yeah. And vice versa, like, the pleasure that comes out of the marks is not going to be there if you're tracing over all of the marks 100%. The pleasure comes in developing the image as you go. And so by putting in these black areas and like working big when you have big brush, and then you start working fine when you have fine brush.
I think a lot of young artists though look at Sam Kieth and like I made this mistake for years and years and years. Like you look at someone like this and you do pencil everything, especially because you grow up in the 90s like with the idea that there's a penciler and there is an inker. Right. And I think there was a ton of kids who were penciling all of this stuff. And then when we inked our own work, we went back over and we became tracers. And I made that mistake for years and years and years, that all of the freshness happened in the penciling and then all of the responsiveness was taken out of the inking. And so I'm constantly catching my students now and being like, no. Like you gotta let the majority of the image happen in the ink. So it's their first time through. Like that's why your sketches are always better,
Right. Because they're alive, because you were allowing your responsive brain to take over and work. So part of that responsiveness is like, okay, I've made a few little ticky hatching marks here. I better go over here and make some other ones, Another thing we always hit when we end up doing a drawing like this, or when we do a talk like this, is there's probably a word for this principle, Carson. Maybe you can tell me if there is. But basically, any technique used only in one place on a picture is going to have a certain amount of disproportionate interest.
It's just a matter of contrast is how I talk about it.
Okay.
Like the way I always tell my students is aberration draws attention.
There you go. Right.
And so it's a contrast thing. It's the only thing on the page like that. It's going to have compositional weight and it's going to have attention. And to me, a lot of compositional weight is attention.
So if you take that principle in mind when you're working on something like this, if you were just doing one section of something and then moving on to the other section, you're going to end up having something that feels like a sort of amalgamation of lots of different things. Whereas if you're bouncing around while you're working on the image and sort of developing it section by section, developing it across the paper, across the entirety of the picture, you're going to have a lot less of these aberrant areas where you used a certain kind of technique or a certain kind of line or a certain kind of texture or a certain kind of weight that you didn't pick up anywhere else.
Yeah. But see, I have the problem. Like I never, you're saying, oh, most people, they need to do this, kind of taking advantage of the state that your brush is in. I don't really do that. Like, I just kind of switch to whatever I need at the moment. And so I'm very likely to just stay in one area and do the thick stuff and this thin stuff all at once. And it's very it's very dangerous for me in that I don't, and it's advice I'm constantly giving my students is to work all over.
Right.
And when I'm inking, I can get very caught up in the just that one area, and it does cause a problem of not backing up. That's a
Right.
Sam Kieth area right there. I don't know
Right.
how he did these curly cues on top of all of that, because it doesn't look like there's any white out. It just looked like he drew them first and then skipped it.
Mm,
What do you think he used to draw these curly cues? Are these a brush?
I do think it's a brush, but Jesus Christ, if I know how he did it. I mean, I guess he's just looping back around. This is another area where I'm deficient as a left-hander.
Nah, it's just a bunch of like down, side, side, up, down, side, side, up.
Yeah, I got him now. But they're
He's
mine are different than his, you know. Mine have the weight the weight shift is different.
yeah, for sure.
But yeah, those seem like brush to me.
Yeah. He's a very, for as wild and as thick and as chunky as his art gets in the later years, I think also like he kind of just quit doing a lot of this stuff because he has an insane amount of control over
Right.
the brush. Like I'm not sure that he needed to take advantage either. I think he could kind of do whatever he wanted with his brush whenever he wanted.
Mm.
Like, I mean, he has some of the finest lines I've seen. You know, we made a big deal about fine lines in Strange Death of Alex Raymond.
Yeah, this
Uh,
is
this is as much or finer than that. And then the amount of them. So I wonder if he just like burnt out, or yeah, he quit smoking weed. Or if he started doing damage to his hand.
yeah, or just the sort of practicality of, you know, doing something like this on a monthly schedule. I mean, when he was doing weekly covers, he wasn't doing interior at the same time.
Yeah, but I mean, now his work tends to be like, you know, when Sam Kieth is done with the book, then you'll get 4 or 5 issues. He could be doing this. He's just leaned more into the cartooning a lot lately. And I mean, I think you just kind of grow out of this stuff too, a lot of people.
Or grow into it.
Yeah, grow into, I grow in and out of it. Um,
See, maybe this is a function of the inferior brushes that I use. But you know, I'm now in fine line zone with this brush. And so I'm just going to keep on doing fine lines until I run out. Because to me, it's like it's not worth messing with, you know.
well, I think another thing is like, this is something Dave talked about, is once you get the brush in the fine line state, then you just be more careful about how you dunk it.
Right.
And I don't ever really reload that brush a lot. I'm only dipping like a little bit. And once it's at that point, you kind of don't want to mess with the point very much.
Right.
So once I get the point, I try and keep it fairly unloaded. And then, but if I need to, I can come back. I have enough ink that, okay, I come over here to this area where there's, you're
Right.
calling just drawing around the black, and I can make a shape like that, which is what I think he's doing over here. I think he's just
Yep.
making those shapes, and there's plenty of ink on the brush.
Yeah, because you can disturb it by moving the direction again, and then the ink is going to come out. So like right now, when I'm staying in the fine line zone, the shape is shaped, like the tip is shaped a certain way, and so the load that's there is only like moving through capillary action or whatever. It's not like coming down from tip movement. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, once, to me, it's like once that shape is there, like I can go into this stuff and get like, you know, I'm getting a lot of mark making without redipping this brush, and I'm getting big areas, and I hardly dunked it at all. and I'd already been doing some fine line stuff. So I'll come over here and do those big areas, but I can just as quickly come back over and do these fine lines on the legs. What brush are you said you're using an inferior brush?
This is a Da Vinci Maestro. It's like a, you know, it's a sable, but it's a cheap sable. I've been using synthetic sables too, but this is a genuine sable. It's just a cheap one. Yeah, you know, I think you're probably right about the dunking. I think that probably part of the issue is that the ink that I use doesn't have a clear casing, so you can't see how far you've dipped it down.
Oh,
which I
the way I deal with that is I just have one jar of ink, and I just always keep it filled to the top. Like
Gotcha.
once it get past where I can see it, I just have a big ass jar of ink, like a big 18 ounce or whatever, like squeeze bottle of it, and then I refill.
Gotcha.
So I always keep it, yeah, to where I can see. I know there was like in Strange Deaths, some of the, I forget who, but they would talk about they would just pour it out into like a pan
Right. And that
and
makes a lot
just
of sense to me.
have a thin pan of ink. So that may be a technique that some people were using too.
Yeah, it's funny how these little micro things like that can affect lots of other things. And you know that I've just accepted that. Like I just accepted, okay, this is the ink that I use and this is what it comes in. But also part of that is just because I've had a mental change over the past 8 years, turning into primarily a watercolorist, where, you know, as a watercolorist, all of these things about load and stuff are primary. I mean, that's just, you can just, you know, it, there are so many advantages to thinking that way about it. I've just sort of adapted those things to the brush and or to the ink, you know.
Well, and you're more willing to work like loose, I think,
Right.
more
That's true.
calligraphic and like more,
This is a
Japanese type
nice
of
way to
ink.
say that I'm sloppy.
No, I mean, it's
Yeah.
just like some people are more calligraphic, and then some people like me are like super OCD, like
Right.
Sam Keith, or super OCD. And so you've developed around, like you haven't necessarily needed to figure out, oh, well, I'm going to keep just like the top eighth of my brush is going to get dunked and everything
Right.
else is going to stay dry. Like that's just
Right.
not part of your standard.
Right. And part of it is too that basically for the past 7 years, since my kids were actually since before my kids are born, I've been working very short work weeks so that I can take care of them half the day. And that short work weeks plus heavy work schedule makes for being as efficient as you can possibly do. Like
Yeah,
that will change you as an artist.
which this type of style is not
No,
time efficient.
no. Yeah, so this like hair texture, I really think that happens with a nib after everything else has been worked in.
Yeah,
It's really
100%.
interesting. I didn't realize how far I'd be able to stay with the brush. Um, Not that mine is as
Ridiculously
fine,
long. Yeah.
right? Um, my work here is not getting as fine. I think that I'm probably working too small, or like
Yeah,
you
like
said, he's
just
got wicked brush control, and I'm
like I can't even stick. And I think a lot of the hair too, there's a lot of areas of the hair that are done like out. Let me see. My brush was getting, I always keep some water, by the way.
yeah.
So luckily in Alabama with the humidity, it's way easier to use the brush than it was in California. I don't have
Hmm.
to get it wet. And the as soon as you dunk it in the water, it actually disrupts the hold. And I
Right.
find it's much harder to
Yep.
get it back to a nice point ever
Yeah. The
until it's
longer you can hold off
yeah.
on that, the better you are.
Yeah. So in California, it would be 5 minutes and I'd have to dunk it. And then it's like, fuck, now my brush is ruined.
Right.
And in Alabama, I can ink for a long time. So local humidity is huge. But I think a lot of like the hair over here, he is doing like this kind of stuff.
Right.
Especially on the outsides. And then he flips over. And I think there's maybe even a loose, fine coat of this. It's really hard to tell, especially up here. There's a lot of, because once these things pile on top of each other, even with the high resolution scan, it's really hard to piecemeal back through all of them. Like there's so much going on right here in the tricep of just like value generation.
Right.
And I don't know, like, is some of this like putting the hair in and then going back with the brush and like evening the values out? It's just
Well,
really
when
hard
you
to
look
predict.
to the right of the face, I think that's probably instructive because there's less hatching there. If you look to the right of the face where the costume is ripped, you can see there's like downward lines and then the webbing connecting those. And then it just looks like the hair hatching is just across the form underneath or on top of those things.
Yeah, but look also like, okay, on this bicep, but also on this bicep here, he's done this stuff and then he's come back and come off of each of these with a series of ticky marks that to me looks like a pin. So each one of these, he's gone back over. Right? Can you see what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And like done ticky marks off the ticky marks. And so it creates the illusion almost that those weren't even ticky marks in the first place, that those were entirely created by like this stippling mark that's coming off of it. It's really strange. Really hard to mimic, especially with the precision that he has. But that is definitely happening all throughout here.
The sort of light burst with the on the head with the forehead deformity and and the stippling really reminds me of underground comics. It's like got a like R. Crumb who wants to make tiny lines quality to it.
Yeah, and then to go back and like stipple on top of an area of already intense cross hatching.
Right.
And then there are like these, there are areas where he's creating, it looks like line, and he's making line out of dots.
Right.
So I don't know. This is absolutely even crazier than I thought. And it's so yeah, at some point I think he's coming in. I want to move on from this area eventually.
You're trapped forever.
It feels like it. I mean, for myself, I could sit here and Graphomania all day.
Right.
And,
if you didn't have to talk, yeah. This is the type of image where I just basically like this is where it starts to be very difficult for me to like. We don't get the enjoyment that the Graphomania gets when we're doing this on camera.
well,
Because
and also it's like you're trying to not spend, we're not trying to make like a 12-hour long video.
Right. And we're also imitating someone else's marks, which is the other point of something like this. Somebody like Sam Kieth has rehearsed these moves.
Yeah, they're natural to him. I mean, these feel pretty natural to me, except I'm not I'm more of a brush guy, so some of what he's doing with the pin, he's flicking.
Yeah, definitely. I haven't switched off the brush yet, by the way.
I mean, you could really spend a lot more time with the brush than I would have predicted.
Yeah, me too.
And then God knows how fast he's going on any of this.
Yeah. It's not obvious to me, the speed. What is obvious to me is the buildup. This is 100% the thing I was saying. He's working across the image. He does a certain kind of line, and then he moves over and does that same line in a different place.
And something something else about like trying to trace it obsessively like I am, so I got to give up on that, is for as fine as all of that work is, I think especially when he's doing the value buildup, he's actually pretty far away from the paper because he's watching the overall impression of gray.
That's right.
If you get caught up like I was in the each little ticky mark, you're losing sight of the overall tone that you're putting in. And so he's really, it's almost like shading with the pencil, except he's just doing it one little mark at a time, but having to be very cognizant of the overall value that he's putting down, which is really impressive. And that again speaks to what you're talking about, that it has to be a buildup.
Right.
Because if you go too dark too quick,
you're stuck. You can't have one area have a 60% hatching or whatever, and then all the other areas, you realize, oh man, I'm going to make the entire thing way too dark if I go with that.
Which is why I wonder if there's some going back with the brush again later. Like with in this white area, it seems like he probably went back with the brush after he put in,
I see,
and then integrated some of the values.
Well, my brush just futzed out, and so now I'm gonna use a little bit of dry brush here.
Yeah, and he hasn't even really done much dry brush up in the arm.
Now there's hints of it, I think, but once again, our scan is not fantastic. This was what, like Image by Heritage or something?
Yeah, I just pulled it offline. And then there's also points like where I'm at right now where I think he moves from ticky marks into just stippling, but the image isn't quite great. But I think there's some stuff in here where he's just stippling just to get texture and value.
Okay, I'm going to switch to a nib now.
This is so difficult.
I'm going to rinse my brush and switch to a nib and see what I can do.
Man, I always dug Sam Kieth, but this is like
eye-opening.
Yeah, this is really, especially like I want to go back and get all of his stuff that he was doing for Marvel now, because this is, yeah, they really need to do it in black and white. This is just so phenomenal. It's so impressive and so mind-boggling that it deserves to be seen. I got to get a hold of one of the artist editions. Because I can't even interpret what I'm looking at in a lot of this. And some of the textures he creates too, in terms of like making a mark, like starting, let me see if I can, like starting a mark thick and then going thin and then starting another, like a blob at the end of it. He'll do that kind of thing in certain spots. Like he's really in control of when he's flicking and when he's pushing, like always in control of how much pressure he's putting into his tool in a lot of different combinations, like starting thick, ending thin, starting thin, ending thick, kind of thick, thin, thick.
Interesting, these like little striations in the muscle hair texture where you've got like bands going across it. So, you know, he's not just doing like a hatching mark that moves across the whole shape. He's got like roughly parallel bands that are stretching across.
Yeah, and creating like cross contours, so the whole thing is like very three-dimensional.
Right.
That's why his characters feel so like chunky and round and
Right.
like three-dimensionally present.
Because you've got an implied cross contour.
Yeah, built up out of the values.
Which is part of what I was complaining about with the computer coloring.
That it flattens all that out.
Well, it imposes a different kind of roundness on it that is sometimes counter to the implied surface.
Yeah, it's what I would typically call like sculptural lighting.
Right.
Like the middle has a highlight on it, and as you move from the middle to the back or the side, then it gets darker.
Right.
And it's a very it is a very like artificial computer generated way of lighting stuff. Like a lot of the early 3D computer art had that. There wasn't necessarily a consistent light source. It was just the closer it is to you, the lighter it gets.
Right. And some of it is just, I think, you know, with the use of gradients and stuff like that. I mean, it's just a question of every time there's a technological change that enables something that was difficult before to be easy, you see a domination of that temporarily.
Well, and that's why we were saying like Wetworks was so perfect.
Right. Right.
Because you make these characters that are made out of metal.
Yeah,
and it's just
they already are going to look like metal because you're going to render them with these soft Photoshop, Neo Photoshop tools, right?
Yeah, it's just like glare effect everywhere. Yeah, this is really blowing my mind. I'm starting to think that maybe some of what I was starting with in terms of, I think this type of shadowing was right.
Mm-hmm.
I think this type of shadowing was wrong. I think the hair got put in after this stage.
Okay.
I think it came to here, and then I think he put hair everywhere.
Right.
And
Yeah, that's
I'm hearing Dashboard Confessional in my head now. Or is that the no? Shit. What's that band? Yeah, Dashboard. Right. Your hair is everywhere.
I don't know. I've never heard that. Yeah, that's my supposition, is that the hair texture was the last thing. Like I was saying, to the right of his head, you can see it a little clearer because there's no other hatching blocking it, but you can see that he put in the brush for the costume, and then he connected the webbing to it, and then it looks like he put the hair on top of that. I don't know if the reverse would make quite as much sense.
Yeah, I think the hair came second. Like, get all the major lines, put the hair, and then build
Okay.
up all that extra value work.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe.
Because that lets you manage the it's
Overall
that
effect.
being safe. It's
Right.
work from light to dark. Like you get
Right.
the big dark areas so you know where they're at, and then you start building. Like I was
Yeah.
building out from the darks basically, and I
Right.
think that was wrong.
Yeah, that's a good value management. That's a good thought.
Yeah, I think this works better because that area that you're talking about on his head too, that's what it is. It's just the big lines. See, and that's where I think maybe there was like some marker involved. Like instead of a brush, he started with a marker just for those big chunky areas. I mean, there's nothing saying you can't do.
No, you do whatever works for you, and if you have something successful, keep on doing that. I just part of this exploration for me when we look at somebody new is like trying to figure out how they were managing the page.
Yeah, the order of things.
And especially like for me, like an efficiency standpoint is really important, especially like there are so many things that artists do to make work for themselves that are unnecessary. I don't think that he's a person like that. I think that he just does the things he likes.
Well, that's why I always think in terms of efficiency is like once I pick up a tool, I'm not very likely to put it back down again.
Right.
So it's like, well, once you have the brush, you're going to keep going with the brush. You'd have to really understand your own process quite a bit to be like,
Right.
okay, I'm going to do the big brush marks, and then I'm going to put that tool down, and then I'm going to do all the little like ticky marks, and then I'm going to pick the brush up again. That's like an artist who really knows themselves well, which
Yeah.
he obviously does. But also in my mind, it's like if there's a first step that is a marker, and I go around and I do all this stuff, just like filling it in with the marker, and then I move on to the pen, and then I move on to, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm certainly finding the little squiggles easier to do with a pen than a brush, but maybe that's just me.
And then thinking about, again, we're like focusing just on one area of the image. I'm going to start moving on to there's all kinds of other stuff in here below him.
Like the dry brush underneath. Yeah, I'm gonna have to bow out pretty soon here, time wise. But the huge dry brush. I mean, I would have thought that would have been one of the first areas because you got that black that sets everything else back.
Yeah, so I think this area of the forearm here, this looks like it's off to a better start than what I did up here where I put the
Right.
hair in last. So I think that's maybe what it is. And then you can
Okay.
go back in with the brush again and start piling in where do you
Right.
need value. And you could go back in, and he's doing all this crazy like, okay, well, I'm going to come into this area and do now some stippling. And he seems probably like one of these people that has all his tools out and is just rummaging back and forth through them.
A smorgasbord.
Yeah. And for as fine as the details are, definitely staying back from the art, so you can see really a good sense of the overall.
It's
Okay, let
amazing
me
how much of a difference just a few inches makes with your head.
Oh yeah, it's and I tend to really lean over, which is unhealthy and not good for the art. You know, you don't see the totality of the art. So down below, I'm going to move to there.
Yeah.
I'm surprised you're usually faster than I am.
Well, I'm kind of stymied by the textural stuff. I think that I'm getting kind of overwhelmed, and also I just really feel like I'm not seeing it through the the image. Like the image that we got didn't give me I don't know.
Well, and it's so fine,
Right.
and there's so much of it. It is really hard to see over top of it. So I'm going to move down because there's a lot of techniques that he has going on here, and I wanted to get to as many of them as possible. On the bottom of this, he switches to the dry brush, and he's dragging out line work with the dry brush, and then doing hatching with the dry brush too.
Right.
Which makes a really nice like spider web texture.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, you know, he's getting this kind of stuff, and then he's coming back in. And when your brush is dry like that, you can do really, really fine cross hatching. And you can see in his art that the fine cross hatching is broken up. It also has like a dry brush quality, and it just makes like for such a soft gray that he's putting in. It's really beautiful.
Okay, I'm going to pencil in the rest of this here real rough so that I can get some of the dry brush before I go.
And it works a little bit more like a pencil.
Right.
In that you get value change with pressure change, which is something he definitely is taking advantage of. And then there's these big, just like calligraphic marks down here for these bushes.
Right.
And then he comes back in with the reductive drawing, subtractive drawing. That's what you call it, right?
Yep. Reductive. That's good too. I just like words that describe the thing.
Yeah. Subtractive drawing. So he gets like some white and actually comes back on top of this area of black.
Mhm.
But it's something along these lines where he's just going, now he's going real quick. So I think this probably happened early in the image.
To actually just clean my brush, which means I'm not able to do the dry brush effectively.
Oops.
Yeah. I got to squeeze it out if I was going to be able to do this. This is the hazard of it. And this is why some people will carry around, you know, keep other brushes around, like a specific dry brush or whatever. For me, that's just too mentally exhausting. I don't want to switch tools every 10 seconds.
Yeah, neither do I. That's why I said when I pick up a tool, I stick with it. I think he has like 10 tools and probably just a mess all over the place.
Notice these suggestive brushes, or these suggestive, what do you call, tree areas are background trees. You know, you're not intended to read them completely, which is part of what makes this approach that he's got so effective. If this was if this is a portrait of a tree, you might not use the dry brush there, you know?
Yeah, when you've got the dry brush, it fans out and it will kind of make multiple lines for you.
Right.
And then he's reloading the brush and using that chaos that's created in that moment as like a guide to then come back and noodle some more.
Right.
So
And
I think the dry brush comes first and then it sets like, okay, here's some random chaos and now I can make up some stuff on top of the chaos.
right. Exactly. And definitely multiple layers of dry brush in the cobwebby thing that you're talking about. And it's interesting, if you are a big texture person, you really like this look, you really should try using that dry brush just like Carson's talking about, and like use it. You can even use it on top of existing areas of genuine detail to build up a sense of more detail than there actually is.
Yeah. And the generative power of it is really, you know, I think impressive. And then again, he's coming in afterwards and integrating it in with this fine, like dry brush hatching. There's just so much. And I'm sure this stuff happens later in the drawing.
Oh, interesting.
Like process, you know, you're talking about these layers. Like I think the dry brush happens and then this like integration stuff probably happens later. Like, oh, that area is too stark, I need to come back in and mess with that a little bit. It's very painterly in that sense, I think. So I think that's a lot of what's going on there. Let's see some other textures.
Yeah, look at the tree that has the dry brush going across it, and then has the reverse direction to build up the actual hatching going along with it. Like, so the tree trunk in the foreground that has roundness to it has a cross contour hatching on top of the dry brush that goes, you know, goes horizontally along the tree.
Yeah, and that's another one of those ones where I think it's, let me go look at that part of the image. I have the image pulled up here. I don't see much dry brush on this one down here.
Yeah, just how there's like parallel lines. Like, here's the.
Yeah, that definitely came in later. That's just really thin brush marks, though.
Okay.
There's a lot of hatching that's really thin. You're talking about this kind of stuff.
That's right.
That's later. I think for this, he came through and, you know, drew the form of the thing. But even this is a lot of it's not just a straight line. It's like build up out of, well, he does a lot of subtractive drawing in there too. There's a lot of
Mhm.
white. But like this tree is the amount of like thin line work that he's doing with the brush on this tree. The texture on the, like, I don't, it's not a tree, what, like bent tree that he's sitting on
Mhm.
is so impressive. And there's so much like just fine, long, thin, fine lines built up
Right.
to make this wood texture.
We should say we mentioned the Jeffrey Catherine Jones influence. I mean, this is like prime example right here. This tree and the mushrooms growing on the side of the tree. This is like
Yeah.
straight out of Idle.
And also to me, like some Wally Wood
Oh, interesting.
and Al Williamson on those mushrooms.
Huh.
Like you
Right.
look at Al Williamson doing like all the forest stuff that he does a lot of that kind of mushroomy stuff. But I don't know, there's someone I'm thinking about with these mushrooms. I'm not thinking of Jeff, maybe Jeff Jones. But yeah, again, there's just so much of this. And then the transition of the gradient into the, like there's a big dark shadow that obviously got put in there first.
Right.
And then the transitional values into that are so subtle. I can't think of hardly anyone else I can think of that's doing that with the brush. And just piling up so much with such subtle line weight shifts.
Well, I don't know about you, but I found this very inspiring.
Intimidating.
I'm gonna I'm not gonna forge any of his originals. Let's put it that way.
No, hell no.
But I will be using a loose influence of this. This is giving me a lot of ideas. I'm gonna have to bow out for now. I don't know if you're going to continue, Carson, but if anybody, or if you are continuing, let me just say I enjoyed doing this with you.
Yeah, I'll just say a couple other things I see for people, and then I'll end it as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
And yeah, sorry that this doesn't look exactly like his stuff. Sam Kieth, you were the man. Quite amazing.
Yeah,
and
it's
quite humbling.
Stuff.
Quite humbling. And if somebody ever has a video of Sam doing some of this stuff, I would love to see it.
Yeah. All right. Take it easy, Sean. I'm gonna go for a little bit longer because there are some other techniques I think people want to see in here.
Excellent. Well, I'll watch it at a later date.
Yeah. All right. Later, Sean.
Bye.
So we keep talking about another area that I found really impressive is right on the log here. It started out with a dark mark like this, and then a lot of, and I don't know if it's brush or pen or both, but a lot of these ticky marks that we associate with what he's doing in Wolverine's hair coming out of it. And there's a lot of work with pen in here. And then a lot of textural mark coming this way. Sorry if my hand's in the way, I'll try and do it this way. I'm going to do a rough, sloppy version, but a lot of texture coming back in this way. And then what I really like about it is to create the gradients that he's getting. He's coming back in and drawing with white as well. So let me build up some of the darks. I think this is done with the pen mostly. There's a lot of some kind of mark making in here. I think pen work. It'll at least go faster with the pen. See if I can get my hand out of the way of the camera. I think it's probably going the other way with it. There we go. I tend to not flip my papers while I'm drawing, but for the sake of being able to film it, I guess this works. Because I do think he's flicking like that. So there's a whole like band of that type of texture, and then he starts lightening up on it, so it gets a lighter value as he comes out here. But what I really like about this area is that he then goes back in with the white and starts doing the same thing with the white, coming in here and flicking. So I've got a white ink on my pen now. And that same flicky mark that he's doing for the blacks, he puts in the white, and it softens up the value transition there. It adds some in-between grays that would be hard to get if you were just doing it with the pen into the black. Being able to have the big chunks of black in between with the small areas of white really eases that transition over. So Sam Kieth definitely does a lot of this, what Sean calls subtractive drawing, where he's drawing with the white over, and then he comes along this edge as well and makes the moss with the white, because you can't draw around all that. But I do believe Sean's right that up here, most of this is not him going over black and doing this kind of stuff. He's drawing around it. There are small areas where he's doing that. There's a lot of stuff on the arm, like right here, where he's definitely coming back in. And I think a lot of artists, including myself, that saw this stuff in print didn't think to use white, and a lot of us tried to do. I can think of Dan Fraga being the guy that to me looked like he developed a style of drawing where he was drawing with tick marks, trying to recreate the look of a Sam Kieth, but going through and like tick black, tick black, tick black. Whereas Sam Kieth was obviously going through and using the whites. So I think there was a lot of that we were seeing in our youth, and some of us were aware that you could do that with the white, and some people like me were OCD doing that just by hand. People like Sam Kieth were definitely, I can see in the scan that he was using whites. There's a lot of stuff in here where he's doing the reductive whites. He definitely took some white and came back into this area here and made some marks like this on top of things that if you just saw in print, you might think he was just drawing around those. There's some really cool, there's so many different techniques here. I'm trying to cover them all. There's a really cool technique on the tree where he's done, I believe, a lot of drawing already with the line work. Let me get my brush ready to go again. This is like, he switches back and forth so much too. I think he's already done a lot of these long, thin lines like this. And he's done a lot of like coming back and doing texture work like this. And then he takes a dry brush or something. It's hard to tell. I think it's dry brush, and is doing like this kind of thing. Yeah, that's what it is. So that's also creating like a stipple pattern without him having to go in and stipple. So there's a lot of this in the tree trunk. And again, I don't know which order any of this goes in. It might be that the dry brushing was first. I don't have enough ink. So it might be that that was all first, and then he went back and put the other lines on top of it. I'm really not sure. And then there's also within all of that dry brush, it really to me looks like he went back later. Let me reinforce some of these with some stronger lines now. So putting thin lines on top of it. So a real play between like chaos and control, you know, letting the dry brush create the chaotic moments for you and then reinforcing order over top of that and taking control of the value structures. But I think also, and this is totally crazy, then taking some of the movement across that was created by the dry brush and doing like stippling to create a like a roundness around this way. But there's certain areas where he's come back in, and what tool he's using, I don't know. But like stippling along the edges of some of those dry brush areas to make it all feel round. Like he's got the length of it represented this way, and then it's coming back and doing this kind of stuff. And he has a real peculiar mark that shows up too, where he presses in and then goes thin and presses in again. That shows up in the max a lot. He does that on his arm. This kind of bit. That's happening in the wood to some extent. When you get down into here, there's a lot of this type of dry brush mark making. Just trying to do a real quick run through of all the different techniques I see because the amount is so impressive. And yeah, like Sean said, it's really inspirational. Like the next time I draw, you know, it's like, man, I really want to focus on texture. A lot of these ink artists that we've been looking at, like Sergio Topi and people like that, have so many different tools for texture, which is something that I've not paid as much attention to. And it's so much fun with all the different ink. So doing like this type of feathering, similar to what's going on over here, creating a softness of the edge with all the feathering. But then like that's not enough. Here's some cool. Dry brush hatching. Like all that softness and breaking up of the edge that he's already created is like not enough. And so he's going back in with the white. And this is where I'm just so impressed by his dedication. Like, okay, now I need to break that up even more. And coming back in and adding like hatching the other way to get like that one stray piece of grass sticking up, or just maybe some little, it's too sharp here, so I'm going to go break that edge up. And you get stuff like that all throughout. You know, if we really went through and spent as many hours as he did, there would be so much of that kind of stuff on top of it. There's also in this big area here, I'm going to ruin this brush by switching back and forth. He's got a big black area here, and he does some more of that reductive drawing in there, which is cool. Let that dry. Let's see what's going on in the roots. Ah, the roots are pretty. There's not actually much going on tricky in here. There's some dry brush down in there. But that area dry. Then he's coming back with the white in here too. And I mean, these are like the thinnest lines. So I think the white ink had to be pretty wet. And my black's still, yeah, my black's still too wet. But there's some really thin. It's gonna pull up. But there's some really thin work going on in here. Just carrying some of that texture works better there where it's a little bit dry. Carrying some of that texture right here would be a good spot to do it. So the biggest takeaway I have, besides all the textural stuff, or maybe it's what the textural stuff is doing, is that Sam Kieth's real mastery is controlling value. Really controlling gradients, like slow changes in gray. That's why I think, okay, I got it wrong up here. Like I have an overall gray now, and then if I'm Sam Kieth, I'm going to come back and say the jump is too harsh between one and the other. So I'm going to now build up more, whether I'm using a brush or a pen, I'm just going to put more transitions in here and constantly looking to smooth everything out, smooth everything together, and drawing in 1,000 different directions to do it, creating all kinds of different textures to do it, coming back and saying, okay, I'm going to stipple in this area now because the stippling's giving me more control over that gradient. I think that's the thing that I'm really learning and becoming impressed by. There's a whole area up here in the forehead that we didn't get to where there's just a huge chunk of stippling that's allowing him to create an even smoother fade and gradient. It's really impressive. Like I knew I was going to have fun on this. I knew I was going to learn a lot, but it's pretty mind-boggling. And pretty, like Sean said, pretty intimidating. But the nice thing about it is, unlike a lot of the work that I've done, I do get the sense that he's not like hunched over and tensed up. He's staying back from the piece. He's letting himself see it big. And we tend to, as viewers or someone trying to recreate all of this, we tend to want to get up in it. We want to stick our nose right in it and see every detail and think about it in that way. But as the person who's making it, it's really behooves you to stay back from the art. And it's something I constantly, for your own health, like physically, and then just your ability to see the totality of the image, something I'm constantly reminding myself of. And doing this today has been a real lesson in what an artist who does that can achieve with value. Yeah, I think that works a lot better. Working from light to dark. So that's another thing. Work from light to dark if you're doing this type of stuff. You can have the big, dark, chunky lines, and then you fill in everything else around it. I think some areas like this are, probably while he's doing it. It's really hard to predict the order of all this. So anyways, I could just keep going forever. I could get sucked up in the lines because I'm totally a graphomaniac. But thanks for following along. I hope this was instructive. There's probably like 30 other techniques in here we haven't covered, but I hope you all got something out of this. So thank you for voting on this one. And for people following along, that want the ability to control which artists that we're doing, definitely sign up on the Patreon, and we'll try and have votes every month or every other month about which artist will talk about one of their books next, and then we'll do a recreation like this and try and break techniques down for people. All right, thanks everybody. Have a great day.